Marriage after the death of a child is not the same marriage you had before. You and your spouse are walking through the same devastating loss, but you may be grieving it in very different ways. And when those differences show up, it can feel like distance, or even worse, like your spouse doesn't care. Welcome back to the Grief Mentor podcast. This is your host, Teresa. Today, we're going to talk about how moms and dads grieve differently and what that means for your marriage and the steps you can take to grieve well together without letting walls build between you. I pray this episode blesses you today, friend.
Are you lost in the chaos of grief, struggling to find your way in the darkness? Are you asking yourself, will I ever be able to enjoy life again? Are you wondering where God is right now? Welcome to the Grief Mentor Show. This podcast is a safe place for you. It will shine a light into the shadows, helping you discover that joy and pain can coexist, that you still have purpose, and there is a path to peace. Hello, friend. I'm Teresa Davis. I, too, was lost in the chaos of grief the day my son died. Just like you, I longed for peace in this unfamiliar world. I longed for the weight crushing my chest to be lifted so I could breathe. I clung tightly to the anchor, and it was there that I discovered the tools I needed to navigate life after loss. And I'm ready to help you do the same. If you're ready, I'm holding my hand out to you, friend. Let me show you the way, one step at a time.
If you're finding this podcast helpful, I'd love for you to share it with another grieving mom or dad who needs to hear this encouraging message today. If you haven't already become a Grief Mentor Insider, why not? Join a community that understands what it's like to walk through this world of child loss. And if you haven't joined the Grief Mentor Monthly Support Group, you can find all that information in my show notes and all the ways that I have to support you there. When our son was taken from us, Tony and I were both in a state of shock, and it looked very different for each of us. We were still recovering from Tony's accident. Tony had fallen off a ladder the July before Andrew's death, just a few short months before his death. And although it wasn't life-threatening, it sent us on a path of multiple surgeries. And he was unable to work. And that was a real problem, friend, because he was self-employed. My employer was gracious and allowed me to drop my hours down to be able to accommodate not only taking care of him, but running a business. I was repairing dental handpieces, the drills that the dentists use in your mouth, and doing all the things that it takes to run a business, plus take care of Tony. Friend, saying that I was stretched to the max is an understatement. So it was a major adjustment to our everyday life. But you do what you have to do, right? Lots of late nights and taking care of customers, making decisions that I didn't want to make, everything that it takes to keep a business running. And it wasn't fun. Let's just put it that way. Our marriage was stretched, to say the least. And on top of all of that, all of the marketing that was my job before the accident went to zero. Friends, you can't have a thriving business without marketing. I was literally on the road traveling to all of our customers that spanned over 2 states. That was part of my job alongside my job as an RN. So I basically had 2 jobs where I work at a surgery center. So now at this point, we are just treading water, right? Just trying to keep the business afloat. And that is stressful when you don't know how that's going to affect your business long term. So he didn't just break his shoulder, friends. He shattered it. So he's had 4 major reconstruction surgeries. He has no rotator cuff on that side of his arm. The head of the humerus was completely fractured off midway down to the elbow. Okay, that's That's a big deal, friends. If you're not in the medical world and you don't really understand what that means that he had basically no use of his arm. And through these multiple surgeries that he had, he has the largest amount of donor tissue in his arm that our well-renowned surgeon in Cleveland Clinic has ever seen. It was a very long journey, and we were in Cleveland 6 months after Andrew's death, having yet another surgery. Here's a fact. Marriages take work on a good day. And those of us who have suffered the death of our children understand completely the weight that brings into our marriage. And add in the stress of everyday life, and you have a recipe for disaster. And let me tell you something, friend. The enemy loves to destroy whatever he can get his hands on. If he can't destroy you through the death of your child, then he will seek to do it any way that he can. So I am here today to help you open your eyes, to keep you from going down a path that leads to the destruction of your marriage. I do not hesitate to share with you that the death of our son landed us in marriage counseling. And I thank God that he put a man in our lives that helped us both see blind spots that we couldn't see on our own. And our marriage today, after 42 years, is stronger than it ever has been. But friend, it didn't happen without intentionality. How did that happen? That's what I'm going to share with you today. Even in grief, the foundation of our marriage is love and respect. Honoring one another even when you don't understand. Let's get into these teaching points, okay? Number 1, mom and dads grieve differently. Now, I don't want to stereotype grieving styles here because it is very different for each person. Typically, moms tend to be intuitive grievers. We grieve outwardly. We show tears. We use our words to try to convey what is going on inside of us, this chaos that has taken over our life. We try to have conversations with the people we love, if they're open to it, to be able to explain these things. However, dads often grieve inwardly for many reasons. They tend to be instrumental grievers, which means they have to grieve with their hands. They have to fix things. They have to do things. They have to keep busy. They use things to distract themselves for many reasons. I won't go into that here because I've done other podcasts about that. But dads suffer in different ways because they feel so inadequate because they couldn't prevent the death of their child, and now they're watching their wife grieve in a way that they can't fix, and it's overwhelming to them. So they tend to develop these coping skills in order for them to be able to manage their own grief and kind of mask the pain because they can't fix it. Now, to us as moms, that can look like they've shut down, but they're grieving too. Love in marriage calls us to be patient with each other. Being able to find a place where we can see their grief in a different way. Okay, that's what I want to be able to teach you today. So in the beginning, couples often grieve next to each other instead of with each other. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, you're living in the same house, you're coming and going, you're doing life beside each other, but not necessarily with each other. And the reason for that, friend, is because grief drives us inward. Just like I explained to you how a mom grieves differently than a dad. So for many couples, that looks like you are living in the same house, coming and going as somewhat strangers because you're trying to manage everything that's going on inside of you. You don't have the tools to do that. We're not born with those kinds of tools. We're trying to figure it out. Our whole world has been turned upside down. Your husband's whole world has been turned upside down, and you're just kind of strangers passing in the night. And that's somewhat normal, okay? Especially with sudden death. And it creates this situation that can cause you to feel very distant from one another. It can cause you to feel unloved by one another because you may be wanting to talk out your grief. Your spouse might be silent. So this mismatch can feel lonely, but it is normal. Okay, so I want you to understand that, especially in the early stages of grief. So just keep this in mind. 1 Peter 4:8. Above all else, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Because, friends, I'm going to tell you, if you're anything like me and Tony, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. We need to have grace for each other. Okay, let's talk about the long-term weight of grief on a marriage. As time goes on, grief will either do one of these two things. It'll either pull you closer or push you apart. The weight is so heavy, it's hard to understand your spouse's grief. And when we don't understand, walls form. And these walls create distance. And distance makes you feel unloved, friend. You're already feeling unloved by God, most likely. And now you feel like you're not even loved by the person who knows you the most. And here's the danger. Those walls can form and they can get really high. When that happens, unhealthy coping skills can creep in. At first, it might look like comfort, but over time, it can destroy your marriage. What does that look like? Well, it might be alcohol. It might be marijuana. It might be prescription drugs that you're using outside of how they were prescribed. Maybe you're looking for that dopamine hit. Maybe you're gambling. Maybe you're overspending. Maybe you are making big unplanned purchases without talking to your spouse because you just need something to make you feel better, right? Or maybe you're looking for intimacy outside the walls of your marriage. And friend, let me tell you, that can lead you down a path of addiction that will take you to a place that you don't want to go. Maybe that looks like overeating, overworking, or just spending hours and hours and hours on social media, just scrolling to escape. But here's what I want you to be aware of. The enemy loves to use grief as an entry point. So awareness is protection. That's what I'm doing for you today. I'm bringing awareness to this because this is what I know to be a fact. 1 Peter 5:8, stay alert, watch out for your enemy, the devil, because he prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Okay, so let's talk about expectations. When couples expect to grieve the same way, disappointment's inevitable, right? You're always going to feel like the other person's letting you down. But when you know ahead of time that his grief looks different than your grief, it lowers that barrier of frustration and resentment. See, wisdom about grief protects your marriage from unnecessary pain. Proverbs 4:7 tells us that getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. So, how do you grieve well together? The first step to grieving well together is understanding grieving styles, because then you'll be able to give each other grace. Then you'll be able to walk out what it tells us in Colossians 3:13 through 14. Make allowance for each other's faults. Okay, the second step to grieving well together is make communication a top priority, friend. Silence builds walls. And the longer you're silent, the easier it is to stay silent. Communication is everything. Even a few words like, I'm having a really tough day today, can open the door to connection. And this is another piece that I want to make sure you understand, especially for moms, but this is true for dads too. Expecting your spouse to understand what you need without communicating it to them is a wrong choice. Okay? Your spouse is not a mind reader. The mindset that brings is that, well, you've lived with me for blank amount of years. You should know what I need. Friend, that's a trap, and don't fall into that. You've never experienced the death of your child before. So how could you possibly understand what needs are This is a whole new world that you've been thrust into. So have grace for your spouse. Sitting there in a position, expecting them to know what you need and meet your needs without you saying a word will set you up for failure for sure. So please hear me. Do not put the weight of grief on your spouse, additional weight of grief on your spouse by expecting them to be able to look at you and know what you need. Friend, no, you got to communicate. You got to understand that they are managing their own grief as well. So communication is a top priority. The third step to grieving well is pray for each other and with each other. What does that look like? Well, that means when you're praying for your list of prayers, you pray for your spouse, but I want you to take it a step further. And if you've never done this before in your marriage, friend, I encourage you to do this because it will take intimacy to a whole new level. I want you to sit knee to knee. I want you to hold hands and maybe even lean in and put your foreheads together. And then I want you to pray for your spouse out loud where they can hear you. Friend, I pray that you do this because it is such an important step. Because sometimes in the spirit of prayer, when the Holy Spirit is present, because you know what we're told, where two or more are gathered, He's in our midst. When you're knee to knee and you're holding hands and maybe forehead to forehead, the Holy Spirit will move in your life in ways that you didn't expect. Okay? This is a very important step. Prayer breaks through silence and creates unity. The fourth thing that I want you to do is seek counseling early. Don't wait for things to explode till they're in a place to where they're completely unmanageable. Seek counseling early. It'll be the best money you've ever spent. Support each other intentionally. Well, what does that look like? Well, in the early stages of grief, you're so focused on your own grief, and I understand that 100% because when Andrew died, I completely shut down. Now, remember, we were in a very critical place in our lives because Tony couldn't work. I was taking care of him. He was doing everything he could do to help me within the bounds of what he could do. The weight of the world was on my shoulders. I was taking care of him. I was running a business. I was doing all the outside work. And then our son died. Well, I was done. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even function, much less understand what his grief and what he was trying to manage because of he was grieving the loss of his arm. You know, he still had an arm, but it didn't work, right? And all these surgeries that we were having and all these promises that were coming that it was going to be better, it wasn't getting better. So he was managing not only the grief of losing the use of his arm, watching his spouse run a business, which that does something to a man, friend. They are the provider. So he was managing all of that, and then I'm shut down. I can't function. So I understand not being able to see your spouse's needs, but over time, I encourage you to be able to look into your spouse in their situation and see them from a different perspective. So what does it mean to support each other intentionally? Well, prayer is that first piece, but maybe you could leave a note where you know they're going to see it and just say, I love you. Maybe you can just give an impromptu hug without words, right? Hugs can communicate a lot, friend. Maybe you can get to a place where you can share memories of your child. That was something that I couldn't do, okay? Memories, pictures, all of that was something that I could not do in the beginning because all it reminded me of was there wasn't going to be any more. So that's not something we could do together. Now, of course, that's completely different, and we do it all the time. It's a part of our conversation that happens naturally now. Remember when, or when we're in any stage of our life, remember when Andrew did this. Now it flows easily, but we're 6 years in. Find a way to support each other intentionally to break that silence. Don't let silence rule in your marriage, friend. Another thing you can do is build small rhythms of togetherness. Just like in your own personal journey, You've heard me say over and over, you're not the same person. The same things that brought you joy before your child died most likely may or may not bring you joy after your child dies. And this is true to your marriage. Things that you used to enjoy together doesn't have the same impact. So find new things, friend. Work at it. Find things that you can enjoy together that bring you peace. One of the things that Tony and I do, we became facilitators for the While We're Waiting ministry. That's a new rhythm that we have developed and created after the death of our child. Well, maybe that's not for you, and I totally understand that. But find a way to create a rhythm with you and your spouse in some kind of way. Simple, friends. Think simple. Don't think big. We can't think big when our child is no longer walking beside us. Maybe that's going for a walk. Maybe that's holding hands and not saying a word. Okay, maybe that's going to the movies. You know, I'm old school. I'm 62. So going to the movies was something that we didn't get to do as a kid. I didn't even see a Disney movie until I was 18 years old because we farmed. That was your way of life. You worked. So for me, going to the movies is a really big treat. Now, I'll be honest, that was something that I couldn't do after Andrew died. But before Andrew died, that was mine and Tony's date night. Even when our kids were in middle school, we realized, hey, we got to do something to keep our marriage together because our kids were starting to getting involved in lots of things that were outside of our walls here inside of our home. And we realized, hey, we need to start doing something to strengthen our marriage. And that became our date night. Now, for a long time, I couldn't go sit in the movies and watch a movie and hold hands with my husband because it just didn't feel right. Now I can. Now it brings me joy again. But find something that you can do with your spouse to build a new rhythm of life. And most of all, friend, lower expectations. I have a question for you. What kind of expectation that you're putting on your spouse right now that they are not able to meet that is creating tension in your marriage? I want you to reevaluate that expectation. Because grief changes everything in your marriage when your child that you and your husband brought into this world is no longer walking beside you. So I invite you, friend, to lower the expectations you have on your spouse and meeting your needs. Start looking at it from a perspective that you need to be able to communicate to them what you need. It's kind of like starting all over again, dating almost, where you start to learn each other and your preferences and finding that rhythm. It's kind of like starting over again, because sometimes what used to bring you joy doesn't bring you joy anymore. So embrace it from that perspective with grace, communication, and prayer. Friend, your marriage can and will survive the death of your child and even grow stronger through it if you take in consideration the things that I've shared with you today. Okay? If today's episode encouraged you, would you please share it with someone who needs to hear it? And while you're there, click follow the show. That way, every time an episode comes out, you'll be alerted that a new episode is there. So I want to leave you with this today, friend. You and your spouse are grieving the same child, but in very different ways. Don't let those differences turn into walls. Grace, communication, and prayer. Because your marriage can hold both sorrow and love. So tonight, I'm going to give you a challenge, okay? I want you to take one simple step tonight. I want you to sit down with your spouse, and I want you to pray together, face to face, out loud. God's presence can knit your hearts in ways that words cannot. He is for your marriage, and He will meet you both in your grief. 1 Peter 4:8. Above all else, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. And that's all I have for you today. So until next time, take care.